Thank you for joining us at the 2016 Rex. We will be having some opening remarks from Naomi Goldstein, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and Mark Greenberg, our Acting Assistant Secretary of ACF.
Thank you, Hillary. Good morning. So it's a privilege to welcome you to the 18th Research and Evaluation Conference on Self-Sufficiency. We have made two major changes since we last met in 2014. We have a new conference name and a new biannual schedule. The new name better reflects the broad scope of the conference, and the new schedule allows us more time to plan an event of that scope. Over the next 3 days, we'll present 5 plenary sessions and 36 breakout sessions. The sessions are organized according to 6 topical areas of research. Those are shown on the slide: TANF, education, training, and success in the labor market, child and youth well-being, fatherhood, relationships and strengthening families, evaluating social programs, and alleviating poverty and strengthening the safety net. The plenaries today include the plenary after this session, which is behavioral interventions to advance self-sufficiency, and a plenary on serving re-entering fathers. Tomorrow, a plenary on severe deprivation, a lunchtime symposium on the use of rapid cycle testing in the private sector and what we can learn from that, and a plenary on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. Friday, we'll have a plenary on replication of evidence-based practices. Our conference attendees come from all across the country, and I see many of you have gotten up early to be here for the very first session. We have attendees from 45 states, DC, 2 U.S. territories, and India. We have over 1,200 in-person and live stream registrants, which is a record for the conference. And I especially want to welcome state TANF administrators and other TANF colleagues. You should have a sticker on your badge denoting your TANF affiliation, and if you haven't done so already, please pick up the information sheet at the registration desk about sessions and events of special interest to you. New this year, we've developed the Rex mobile app, which is very cool and allows you to view the conference agenda, plan your schedule, connect with other attendees, and receive real-time updates about conference events. You can also share your thoughts and reactions on Twitter directly from the app. And I want to highlight a few features that might be of interest. You can view the agenda and personalize your schedule. I've done it. You go to the agenda, you click on the star for what you're interested in, and then that session is in your own personalized schedule. You can create a public profile and connect with other conference attendees, and when I last looked, not that many people had done it, so please do it. It's a great way for other people to know that you're here and make a connection. You can download presentations and take notes. You can engage in social media through the app. So you can join the conversation by tweeting with the hashtag Rex2016. If you want others to see your tweets, you have to remove your private setting. And if you want us to retweet, be respectful and constructive. And you can start a virtual roundtable discussion by joining our LinkedIn group. You just search for Rex on LinkedIn and you'll find it. So you can get all the information you need about the conference on your mobile device. And you can, to get there, you download the app from the Apple App Store or Google Play, or visiting the address on the slide to download the app. You can also just search for Rex 2016 to get where you need to go. So we will be live streaming every plenary and every breakout session that happens in this room. So hello to all our remote participants. And we especially invite you, if you're participating remotely, to connect with the rest of us using social media. You can send questions to panelists using email to 2016rex@gmail.com, or by tweeting with the hashtag RexLive, or directly on the live stream site by using the Submit a Question function. So we do value in-person communication as well, and have a number of networking opportunities planned. Let's start now. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to introduce yourself to someone else at your table. All right, that's enough of that. Time to stop. I knew this would happen. Okay, we're going to continue. So I'm always a little surprised at how much you seem to enjoy that, but that's great because we have many other networking opportunities planned. We will be having a, today, lunchtime, is that today? June 1, yes. A lunchtime panel discussion on careers in research related to poverty, family, self-sufficiency, and social welfare in the Palladian Ballroom. It's open to all conference attendees, but meant for people who are early in their careers, and it will feature panelists with experience working in federal and local government, in research firms, and in nonprofit organizations. We have two separate poster sessions this year. A poster session on emerging scholars, and the posters will be displayed throughout the conference, but during the scheduled poster session from 2:45 to 4 today, the researchers will be on hand to answer questions. And we're also hosting this year a Family Strengthening Scholars poster session tomorrow from 2:15 to 4, featuring our grantees who are dissertation-level students focusing on issues related to healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood. We'll have an informal social gathering immediately following the conference today at 5:15 in the Omni Shoreham Marquee Bar and Lounge, and it will surprise no one that refreshments will be available for purchase. And finally, on Thursday from 2:30 to 3:45, we'll have facilitated roundtables that offer a chance for a facilitated conversation on a range of topics, all listed in the program book or the conference app. I want to mention a few additional resources. We have several exhibit booths near the registration desk, an OPRE information table with information about our office, display copies of some of our reports, and an opportunity to register for our electronic newsletter if you haven't already. The Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, which is a national repository of information on self-sufficiency research. The exhibit offers information and an opportunity to visit and give the clearinghouse a test run. We have an exhibit on our recently completed Employment Strategies for Low-Income Adults Evidence Review, a systematic review of literature on the effectiveness of employment and training programs for low-income adults. We published findings last year, and you can stop by the booth at any time to check it out. And lastly, a booth for our National Research Center on Hispanic Children and Families, a research hub that's focused on improving the lives of low-income Hispanic children through research, policy, and practice community building. And of course, I want to thank the people responsible for putting this event together. To our Family Self-Sufficiency Research Technical Work Group, thank you for your guidance on our research agenda. We met yesterday and got a lot of good advice, which is why we invite those people to come. Our OPRE and BSC staff, Mark Fucello, Hillary Forster, Tiffany McCormick, Amelia Popham, Kim Klum, Victoria Kabak, Hannah Duncan, Brandon Hersey, and Tyler Hatch. You're amazing. And our support contractor, Impact, Jennifer Pinder, Annie Oliver, Morgan Molnar, Dara Kaiser. I don't know if any of them are here. They tend to be in the background making everything run smoothly. I turn next to introducing Mark Greenberg, Acting Assistant Secretary for ACF. I have introduced Mark a number of times at past REX conferences and other events, and I usually mention his distinguished career before joining ACF. For example, he directed the Georgetown University Center on Poverty, Inequality, and Public Policy, and was a senior fellow at both the Center for American Progress and the Center for Law and Social Policy. He's a widely respected expert on issues affecting low-income families. He's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. All of that is notable, very notable, really, but I want to emphasize what he's done at ACF. Mark joined ACF in 2009 as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and became Acting Assistant Secretary in 2013. Given his background, it's not surprising that he maintains a keen focus on the ultimate goal of our programs, to help children, youth, and families, individuals, and communities become resilient, safe, healthy, and economically secure. Moreover, Mark cares about evidence. During his time at ACF, he's done a number of things that matter for our work and will continue to matter after he leaves. He encouraged us to develop an evaluation policy for ACF, and I know he plans to talk about that. And he's stuck by the principles of that policy, even when it hasn't been the easiest course. He has supported evaluation and research whenever he's had the chance. For example, he's insisted that resources for learning be included in new initiatives. and he's supported the use of evaluation and research in policy and program decision-making. These accomplishments and contributions are important, but perhaps not surprising given Mark's background as an analyst and a well-known policy wonk. But in addition, he's proven to be fiercely committed to improving ACF as an institution and as an employer. He's identified key management priorities and has pushed them forward with energy and persistence despite numerous bureaucratic challenges. So, in short, I'm a big fan, and I'm pleased to introduce my boss, Mark Greenberg.
Thanks very much, Naomi. And thanks to all of you for joining us for the 18th convening of the Research and Evaluation Conference on Self-Sufficiency, the REX. I've been able to attend most of the prior 17 conferences. And in 2018, I will look forward to being here again in my personal capacity. But today will be my last REX conference as part of ACF leadership. So I do appreciate having an opportunity to make a number of points this morning, though there are perhaps a few that I will need to hold for 2018. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the establishment of ACF, and from the beginning, ACF has supported rigorous research and used that research to guide policy. You'll hear about a lot of that research over the course of the conference. In this administration, we have initiated efforts which include, but are not limited to, the Health Professions Opportunity Grant evaluation, the behavioral interventions for advancing self-sufficiency coming up in the next plenary, the subsidized and transitional employment demonstration, our work around TANF workforce coordination, job search, executive function, toxic stress, and more. And as Naomi mentioned a moment ago, in this administration, we also developed the ACF evaluation policy, which is available on the ACF website, and it's posted in the Federal Register. The evaluation policy highlights our commitment as ACF to proceed in accordance with principles of rigor and relevance and transparency and independence and ethics. And I encourage everybody to read the policy. There are a number of aspects that I think are important, but I want to single out two. First, we commit to releasing evaluation results regardless of the findings when evaluations are done. That's usually within 2 months of completion of a report. And second, the decisions about approval and release and dissemination have been made the responsibility of the head of OPRE and not the political leadership of ACF. I view these as really crucial principles for the independence of research, and I'm proud that we made them. I'm also proud that since the last conference, we have elevated Naomi's position to Deputy Assistant Secretary for Planning, Research, and Evaluation. We did that in part because of Naomi's extraordinary work and extraordinary leadership, but we also did it to institutionalize and formally recognize the importance of research and evaluation in being a learning organization. In making the position and announcing it to our staff, we communicated our vision of ACF as an evidence-based organization which is dedicated to continuous learning, and Naomi and her colleagues are actively pursuing a set of steps to bring that effort forward. I'd like just for a moment to ask the OPRE staff to stand. I thank you for all that you've done. For me, one of the pleasures of being at ACF has been the opportunity to work with the OPRE staff and to learn from the OPRE staff. For us, it perhaps doesn't sound like a bold statement to say that we're committed to being an evidence-based organization, but I do want to take a few minutes to talk about what seems straightforward about this and what seems challenging. First, what seems straightforward. We're committed to supporting and drawing from research because we want to improve the effectiveness of our efforts, and we don't want to do things that don't work. And from the research, we're often able to learn that sometimes our best judgments about these questions don't turn out to be right, or turn out to only be partially right, or sometimes turn out to be sort of right but for the wrong reasons. So having a rigorous research agenda is a crucial way to learn, to confirm or refute our hunches, and in a highly partisan political environment, to try to get beyond politics when there's actual evidence that bears on a question. However, sometimes this is framed as an effort to determine, quote, what works. And I think in important ways, that's actually not a helpful way to think about what we're trying to do. There may be times when research unequivocally demonstrates that a program or initiative had no impact, or that its cost clearly outweighed its benefits, with the implication that we need to stop doing whatever that was. But lots of research findings aren't like that, particularly when we see that a program had some impact for some groups in some settings. If that's what we see, it really doesn't follow that the answer is, or that our response should be, it worked, let's replicate it. And to tell administrators that they can only do the thing that was evaluated and was demonstrated this impact. It shouldn't be our response, because even if there is an impact, it may or may not have been big. We may or may not have confidence about what caused the impact. There may be challenges of replicability, particularly in different contexts or with different populations. And even when we're confident that we have seen a sizable impact and we know why, we recognize we're still not at the end point of knowledge, and it may be possible to do better. So one challenge in being evidence-based is to ensure we're always asking how this set of research findings contributes to our overall efforts to strengthen the effectiveness of programs, and to not oversimplify by simply dividing the world into things that work and things that don't. Second, in being an evidence-based organization, we need to ask, what does it mean to be evidence-based? And do we want to be evidence-based all the time? At ACF, we place a strong emphasis on the importance of supporting and learning from experimental random assignment studies. At the same time, our commitment to being evidence-based is guided by the recognition that evaluation involves more than experimental studies, and learning involves more than evaluation. Our evaluation policy says a learning organization with a culture of continued improvement requires many types of evidence, including not only evaluation, but also descriptive research studies, performance measures, financial and cost data, survey statistics, and program administrative data. Excuse me, I got to take some water. So while we recognize the crucial role of experimental findings, we also understand that policy officials and program administrators face hundreds of questions every week, only a small fraction of which can be answered by the findings from experimental studies. And we need to proceed with the humility that comes from the recognition that research almost never answers a policy question completely and unequivocally. We also need to ensure that being evidence-based is not the enemy of innovation. There are times when it's suggested that we're only confident something works when it's been experimentally evaluated, and we should only or primarily fund initiatives which have been experimentally evaluated. As I noted a couple of minutes ago, one problem with this approach is it divides the world into the things that work and the things that don't. And I think that's far too simple a perspective to be useful. Another danger of that perspective is that it can impose a potentially impossible burden of proof on efforts to try something new. Even with a fairly broad definition of evidence-based, there is a case to be made that much of our status quo is not evidence-based. To improve it, we have to try new things. That requires going beyond what we already know, and at ACF we are committed to ensuring that we never treat the interest in building an evidence base as being in opposition to innovation. So that suggests the broader context for our work, and for this year's conference. This year's conference coincides with the 20th anniversary of the enactment of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. And while we ultimately decided against doing a formal 20-year retrospective, the TANF experience does inform the content of the conference in several important ways. First, as was the case 20 years ago, it still is true that most poor children live in homes with a single mother, and when we look at employment trends for single mothers, it's clear that the dramatic progress that began in the early 1990s ended in 2000. It's also the case that too often the welfare employment research and TANF practice has substantially relied on findings that are more than 20 years old, reflecting a very different labor market and a pre-internet labor market. So in this administration, we have supported research to find more effective ways of helping families enter and sustain employment and gain access to better quality jobs. And there are sessions throughout the conference on career pathways research, the potentials for sectoral strategies in healthcare, stronger coordination with the rest of the workforce system, better use of labor market data to guide employment strategies, and the role for subsidized employment. Our administration has also emphasized the fundamental importance of ensuring that children receive the financial and emotional support of both parents. And you'll see sessions focusing on strategies for supporting both the employment and the engagement of fathers in children's lives. And while the research is still at an early stage, we're encouraged by the innovative and more comprehensive two-generation strategies that a number of states and communities are exploring, and we're committing research dollars to these efforts, and we've got a session highlighting two-generation strategies. It's also clear that one major part of the TANF story is the sharp decline in the provision of assistance to poor and eligible families, and that has been an important contributing factor to the growth of deep poverty among families with children over the past 20 years. ACF has supported research to better understand the circumstances and the needs of families in very deep poverty, and several of the conference sessions will focus closely on those issues. If you've been to the last several RECs, you know that another major theme in this administration has been our commitment to looking at and learning from brain science to identify better ways to operate programs and to help families succeed. It's a principal focus of our early childhood work and across ACF. The session following this one explores some of the early findings from efforts to apply behavioral economics in the context of human services programs. Subsequent sessions will focus on the potential to more effectively, more systematically address and strengthen executive functioning, and to bring greater clarity to what it means for human services to be trauma-informed. This work is informed by the research relating to toxic stress, indicating that when children experience strong, frequent, or prolonged adversity without adequate adult support, the prolonged stress can disrupt the development of brain architecture and other organ systems and have lifelong negative effects. We think that it is fundamental that public policy seek to reduce the stressors that too often characterize the lives of poor children and families and communities, while strengthening the capacities of caregivers to cope with both current stressors and the continuing effects of past ones. We recognize there are multiple questions about how to best bring this framework to the work of human services programs, and that's a key part of our research agenda. We believe that our research agenda, drawing from these insights in brain science, can provide important insights that may ultimately lead to better results in efforts to help adults succeed in employment, improve parenting, strengthen capacities to focus on goals and future planning, and manage conflict and stress across multiple domains of activities. So we view this work as important. At the same time, we want to be clear that structural factors in our economy and public policy, and not deficiencies in executive functioning or the impacts of trauma, are central in understanding why the United States continues to have a child poverty rate exceeding those of virtually all other developed nations. and in understanding how the severity of inequality constrains opportunity and mobility. And it remains a principal challenge for our research agenda to better articulate and map out research strategies that contribute to addressing these broader structural factors. In these opening remarks, I've only touched on a fraction of what will be covered at the conference. You'll note, among other things, sessions relating to our tribal research agenda, challenges affecting immigrants and mixed status families, sections relating to family formation, homelessness, disability, and other key issues. In every REX conference, we seek to have a conference that offers significant value to program administrators, to policymakers, and researchers. We thank you for attending, and we'll look forward to the next 3 days. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Emily Schmidt. I'm a senior analyst in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. Welcome to this plenary session on behavioral interventions to advance self-sufficiency, what we learned, and what's next. I'm moderating the session, but I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background about behavioral science and our BIAS project, and then I'll turn it over to our panel, who will talk to you about the BIAS findings, the operational lessons from BIAS, and the next phase of behavioral interventions for ACF programs. So our BIAS project, Behavioral Interventions to Advance Self-Sufficiency, was launched by OPRE in 2010, and our goal was to answer the question, can insights from behavioral science be used to improve the operations and efficacy of human services programs, and ultimately the well-being of low-income and vulnerable children, adults, and families? So what do I mean by behavioral science? Well, to illustrate, I want to ask you to think about two different types of people. First, think about someone who is very rational, very well-informed, has stable preferences, meaning they want the same thing no matter if they're tired, they're hungry, whatever's going on. They are perfect self-control, very self-interested, and they're really good at making decisions that maximize their well-being. So they can take in all the information that's relevant to a given situation, process it like a supercomputer, and spit out the correct answer that will be the best choice for them in any given situation. So I just want you to think for a moment of anyone you know who might be like that. So now I want you to think about someone else, someone who might you say has limited cognitive capacity, imperfect self-control. They don't always want the same thing. Sometimes they procrastinate, they get overwhelmed when they face too many choices, they take mental shortcuts, they let small factors influence big decisions, and they're not so good at always coming up with the maximizing answer for their given situation. So now you can think about if you know anyone in your life, or maybe even you yourself, who at least some of the time acts a little bit more like Homer Simpson than they do like Spock. And so why is this important? It's important because a neoclassical economist, the type of economics that you would learn in Econ 101 in grad school, tells you that we're all these rational, utility-maximizing individuals. Behavioral science brings in some new evidence and some new language that acknowledges and has experimental evidence about the way that we all act like Homer Simpson, at least some of the time, and that we do so in ways that are to a certain extent systematic and predictable. Now, this is really important for public policy, public programs, because many public programs are implicitly or explicitly based on the idea that a rational person will weigh the benefits and the costs. And if the benefits outweigh the costs, the person will show up to the meeting, fill out all the forms, having arranged travel and childcare, jump through the hoops, and then they'll do it every 6 months to recertify. And Spock would definitely do that if the benefits outweighed the cost for the programs, but I think you can imagine that Homer Simpson might run into some trouble along the way. So what BIAS did was it tried to take some of these insights from behavioral science, this growing body of experimental evidence that shows not just that humans sometimes deviate from what a rational economics model would predict, but that we do so in these predictable ways, that there are insights about how people actually behave that can be used to potentially improve program performance. BIAS was the first major effort to apply this behavioral science lens to programs that serve poor and vulnerable families in the United States. We built a body of evidence that you're going to hear about today, and you're going to hear about the implications. So before I turn it over to set the stage for what they're going to tell you about, I'm also going to share the process we used in BIAS called behavioral diagnosis and design, because it's important for understanding what we found. So the key point here is that BIAS was a problem-driven project. We didn't set out to test particular behavioral insights. We set out to solve challenges that human services programs were facing. So we did this using this behavioral diagnosis and design process, which was adapted from a process that Ideas 42 used. We started by defining the problem, defining it in a neutral way, in a measurable way, a way that doesn't presume either the cause of the problem or the solution, and that's stated in such a way that you know when the problem has been solved. Then we would diagnose the problem, and in BIAS, we did what we called a behavioral map. So we would think, okay, if we want someone to do X, what's every single step they would need to take to get there? What's every decision that they would need to make? And are there places where we can either look at the data and see that they're not following through, or we can hypothesize that maybe this is a place where they're not following through? And are there things we can bring in from what we know of behavioral science and psychology that might explain why people are dropping off at that particular point? Then you design an intervention that's unique to that problem and specific to that diagnosis, bringing in behavioral insights to address the particular bottlenecks identified in the diagnosis phase. And finally, test. So in BIAS, every intervention was tested using a random assignment design. We ultimately did 15 random assignment experiments in human services programs testing these behavioral insights. That's what our panel is going to tell you about today. So we have today Mary Farrell, who's the co-founder and executive vice president of MEF Associates and a member of the BIAS team, who's going to go over the program areas that BIAS worked in and what our findings were. Nadine Deshaussee, a BIAS project manager from MDRC, who will tell you about the operational lessons we learned, what was it actually like to implement behavioral science insights in human services programs. LaShawn Richburg-Hayes, who's the director of the Young Adults and Post-Secondary Education Policy Area at MDRC and the project director for BIAS, will talk to you about next steps in the area of applied behavioral insights for ACF programs. And Crystal Hall, who's a professor at the University of Washington's Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, who's currently serving a year as a fellow with the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team, will make some discussion remarks and talk about the implications of this work, and then we'll look forward to questions and comments from all of you.
Thanks, Emily. So the goal of BIAS has been to learn how tools from behavioral science can be used to deliver programs more effectively and ultimately improve the well-being of low-income children, adults, and families. And as Emily said, the BIAS team launched 15 tests of behavioral interventions. And this was quite an undertaking. Between May 2013 and May 2015, we randomly assigned close to 100,000 clients. And we used techniques that have been used in the private sector to get us to buy things, but instead we used it to nudge TANF recipients, recipients of child care benefits, non-custodial parents, to do things that were really in their self-interest that would benefit them. Most of these pilots involved changes in communication, sending letters, postcards, text messages, robocalls, and emails. And I'm going to do my best in 15 minutes to summarize the findings across the 15 sites. But I'm going to be moving through the slides pretty quickly, so I do encourage you to go to ACF's and MDRC's websites. There are reports on all of these pilots, and look out for a report that will be coming out at the end of the year that will synthesize the findings. And also for those who are interested in learning more about BIAS, there will be a panel tomorrow at 1 o'clock on the child support tests. So going through there are 3 domains that make up the BIAS portfolio. The work supports domain focused on TANF engagement in Los Angeles County. Paycheck Plus, trying to get people to attend an informational meeting in New York City for Paycheck Plus. The child support domains focused on collections in 2 counties in Ohio. and order modifications in Texas and Washington. And in the child care domain, we focused on recertification in 2 states, Indiana and Oklahoma. And in Indiana, we also focused on increasing the percentage of parents who chose high-quality providers. So this chart shows all of the 15 RCTs on one chart. Each of these bubbles represents the impact from the RCT, and it's notable that all pilots generated statistically significant impacts on at least one outcome. The impacts were modest, generally ranging from 2 to 4 percentage points, depending upon the pilot, though there's some outliers. As you can see, there are 3 sites that were in the 11 percentage point range, and Washington State is an outlier with an impact of 32 percentage points. This shows the cost per program group member, and as you can see, the cost of the interventions was quite low, ranging from 50 cents per person in the Cuyahoga, Ohio pilot, which sent text messages to non-custodial parents, to just under $11 in the Washington State pilot, which sent applicant packets and emailed incarcerated non-custodial parents. It's a little bit more expensive because they actually had someone who responded to those emails that were sent to them, but still, $11 is pretty cheap per person. I do a lot of cost studies of welfare to work programs, and they're always in the thousands of dollars per person, so $11 is still a very low-cost intervention. So there are 3 points we wanted to make here. The impacts were modest, but they were consistently achieved with at least one impact from each of the sites. They're very low cost, and they're scalable, meaning that the states could scale up with very little effort. So talking a little bit about the child support domain now. This is child support is a program that was created so that children receive financial support from both parents when the parents are separated. Parents have to come in for a meeting to establish their order, and they're provided a lot of information in that meeting during a time when emotions are high. They're talking about visitation and paternity and income and employment, and there's a lot of stuff a lot of information that's being provided to them, and so it's not too surprising when they may not comprehend everything, including what they should be doing next, what they should be doing if their circumstances changed. So this is a problem we want to focus on. There are 2 problems we focused on. Order modification in Texas and Washington, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Texas in more detail next. And then collections in 2 counties, Franklin County and Cuyahoga County in Ohio, which focused on sending reminders to encourage non-custodial parents to pay. 8 of the 15 bias tests were in this domain. So talking a little bit about Texas, which was the first pilot that came out of bias, and it focused on incarcerated parents who owe child support. Now, obviously, they're in prison. They have very limited means to make any payments. If they don't reduce their order and instead debt will accrue over time, they leave prison with tens of thousands of dollars in child support owed, which has some negative consequences later. So Texas had a process for parents to apply for a downward modification of their child support order. Like a lot of states, they could reduce their order. Their circumstances have changed. And in Texas, they could reduce it to as low as 0. And the state actually encouraged the eligible parents to apply. They sent them a letter in prison and along with an application. But only about 31% applied. And clearly, others had financial interest to apply, but they weren't making the effort. So the question is, can Texas increase the number of incarcerated NCPs who apply for a child support order modification? So we're building upon an outreach campaign by the state. We wanted to improve upon it. So we redesigned the letter. They were sending an application already, but we simplified the letter, we made it more salient. We pre-populated the application with information that the state already knew, and we designed 2 postcards. And we used a random assignment design in all of these studies. In this study, about 1,000 non-custodial parents got the new materials, and about 1,000 got the standard outreach materials. So this is the postcard that was sent about a couple of weeks before they sent the letter and application, and it was really designed to expose parents to the process. You know, in a few weeks, we'll send you everything you need to complete and submit the application. So they didn't have to open anything up. They were expecting this letter, and a couple of weeks later, they got the application packet, and we redesigned the letter to make it more salient, to simplify it. We designed 4 easy steps, and we personalized it with their name and the amount that they owed. And then a reminder postcard was sent about 6 weeks later to those who hadn't yet responded, just reminding them that it wasn't too late and their debt gets bigger every month. So this shows the findings from this pilot. And as this shows, the revised outreach increased the percentage of parents that submitted the completed applications by about 11 percentage points. So even though the state was already doing something, we were able to improve upon the outreach, and with a pretty fairly simple intervention. So now moving to the child care domain. The Child Care Development Fund provides child care subsidies to low-income parents who are working or in school. The child care program often requires clients to make decisions and follow a series of steps in order to obtain benefits. You know, this might include proving eligibility, selecting a child care provider, recertifying benefits. So the 4 of the 15 bias tests were in the child care domain. The test in Oklahoma focused on recertifying benefits, and the test in Indiana focused on recertifying benefits and choosing high-quality child care providers. I don't have an example from this, but Nadine will be providing an example in her presentation. And then turning to the work support domain. As many of you know, the TANF program is designed to increase parents' self-sufficiency. And this is the goal of other income support programs as well, including the Earned Income Tax Credit, which provides an incentive to work. But all of these programs, they may have requirements. They require that they engage in the program, attend meetings, respond to communications, and things like this. And this can pose a real challenge to program staff. So 3 of the 15 bias tests were in the work support domain. I'm going to talk about LA next. I will mention that in New York City, they were focused on increasing the number of eligible participants who attended a meeting to learn more about Paycheck Plus, which is an expanded Earned Income Tax Credit program. So moving on to LA. In 2009, California temporarily exempted from its Welfare to Work program TANF families with young children. These are families with children between the ages of 1 and 2, or 2 children under the age of 6. They did this to save money because they were in a recession, they were facing a big budget crisis, they didn't want to have to pay money for childcare and other support services. So they temporarily exempted this group of families, but in 2013, that exemption ended. And so the state really did require that they re-engage them all, make sure that they have information needed before they started, sanctioning people for noncompliance. And so they had to come in for a re-engagement meeting, and the state mandated that they send out 2 mailings, one 60 days before, one 30 days before, 2 phone calls, one 10 days before the meeting, and one 3 days before the meeting. The notices were written by the state. So there's a lot of outreach, four forms of outreach that was happening. Most people were not attending the re-engagement meeting. The county had until December of 2014 to re-engage all of them. So there was this, clock that was ticking, and they had to move forward. And so the question was, could they increase the percentage of parents who became positively engaged? And by positively engaged, I mean they come for the appointment, they're appraised, they develop a plan, they sign the Welfare to Work plan. So here are the findings. Here's the intervention. What we did was we redesigned a new letter. It was a 5th form of outreach. It was very salient. We ended up creating 2 different behavioral letters, though, to test whether framing matters. We had one group that got the loss frame notice, which highlighted the loss of not attending. They're going to miss out on jobs and lose up to $2,500 a year in benefits. And then we had another notice that was sent to another group that highlighted the benefits of attending the meeting. They're going to take advantage of jobs available, keep up to $2,500. We also had Post-it notes, and they used the loss frame also in the gain frame, highlighting the benefits and the losses. So control group, we found that the effect that it increased engagement by 3.6 percentage points. And then we compared the gain frame to the control group and the loss frame to the control group, and we found that it was a loss frame group that increased re-engagement by 4.4 percentage points. So it provides a little bit more evidence that maybe people are loss averse, and maybe we have to really make some effort to, the words do matter, and that maybe we should consider how we frame messages. There were no impacts that were found of either notice at 60 days or 90 days. And this isn't too surprising because by that time, there are lots of noncompliance notices that get sent to the TANF recipients. There's a home visit that takes place before they're sanctioned in LA County. And all of this takes a lot of effort. It's very costly. And so even though there was a pretty modest impact at 3.6 percentage points, it still could have been cost effective. So in summary, behavioral insights can be successfully applied to human service programs. We started small and we hope to build off of this going forward, but this shows that you can use behavioral science to improve human service programs. The intervention should be customized to the context and problem, as Emily discussed, and Nadine will be talking about this again. We didn't go into each of these pilots thinking that we knew what we would do. Instead, we used a process. Diagnosing the problem, collecting data, identifying bottlenecks, and then designing the intervention. As you saw, the bias interventions were typically nudges that had modest effects. However, they were meaningful due to their low cost and scalability, and we started small with this project with nudges. We're going to hopefully build off of this and go beyond nudges in the next generation, and LaShawn will be talking about that in her presentation. Thank you.
Hello. So as Mary said, my name is Nadine from MDRC, and I'm going to be talking to you about an aspect of behavioral research that is often overlooked, and that is the process of implementation, which often comes with a certain number of challenges. So, when behavioral insights teams report on their work, they tend to focus on the problems that they tackled, the design of, the thing that was implemented, and whether or not it worked. They talk about the findings. But what you don't hear about is, the kind of institutional realities of trying to develop these intervention techniques, which means confronting issues like resource constraints, the laws that govern a lot of these processes that we're trying to change, the incentive structures, the timelines that by which things have to be done, the technology. So, we might be dealing with agencies that can't print in color, that can't, generate a letter that has a table in it because it doesn't have the capacity for certain types of graphic design. So how do we, design these interventions taking into account all of those constraints? The other set of issues that you confront as well doing this work is that, there's often a question of the political desirability of engaging in some of this work. And so, you have to make sure that the intervention is in line with agency values in as much as you are trying to push those values as well. So this presentation is going to address the idea, or sort of talk about the idea that sometimes the thing that is implemented and evaluated is actually not the first or most optimal solution, but it is as close to that solution as we could get, at least at that time, and given other constraints. So this first slide just introduces you to the timeline for the BIAS projects. So as Emily described, we had a process that went through some to do next, whether or not we're going to use the findings from the first test to iterate and create a new intervention. And it typically took about a year to go from the process of the BIAS team, starting an engagement with a site to putting a test into the field, which is a very quick timeline for those of us in the room who've worked on other RCTs. And the things that kind of made that timing possible had to do with some of the sort of criteria that we use to choose sites. So agencies were chosen to work with BIAS because they had control and could deliver the data that we needed, both to diagnose problems or to define issues that we wanted to improve, better understand the bottlenecks, and to evaluate. And they also had control over the practices or processes that we were looking to change. So again, if we were aiming to make more intensive changes to these programs, it would have taken more time to get higher levels of authorization. We also looked at outcomes that were proximate to the intervention itself. So these are studies essentially of the mechanisms or the factors that mediate the pathway between point A and some longer-term outcome of interest to the system or to reducing poverty. So within that context, I think there are four, big operational achievements that we should point to right at the start. The first is that all of the agencies that working with at the agency level, often leadership within those organizations who were really bought into the concept of behavioral insights. They wanted to use that behavioral lens to reimagine service delivery. And that was a very exciting thing to have their partnership. The agencies all launched randomized controlled trials while meeting ongoing program deadlines and mandates. So we were able to, do some A/B testing and sometimes very much more complex study designs, like using factorials and so forth, with again, no additional program funding, and while the program was kind of doing its business as usual at the same time. And all of the interventions were implemented with fidelity. I mean, there were occasions when the wrong letter went out to a person or group, but we were monitoring the implementation of these interventions very closely. And so we can say that those errors were very rare, and that, again, on the whole, the interventions were implemented with fidelity, which is great. So I wanted to spend a few moments talking about one of these studies as a kind of case study for how this work got done, the kind of implementation reality of doing it. And I want to focus on the child care test that was done in the state of Indiana that focused on recertification. So, improving the recertification process, both for parents and for agency staff. Our partner in this site was the Indiana Office for Early Childhood and Out-of-School Learning. So the problem that we tackled here is, or just to give you actually more context on the problem. So, parents who receive the Child Care and Development Fund subsidies must document their continued eligibility for that benefit. And in Indiana, in Marion County where we were working, parents had to come in at least every 6 months to prove they continued to be eligible. And they had to do an in-person office visit. This was not something that could be done remotely. And so based on data and observations that we did, we saw that about 50% of parents missed their first scheduled appointment for recertification, and that about 46% of families needed to do, or parents needed to make multiple visits to complete a single round of recertification. So they weren't able to kind of get this out of the way in a single visit. Had to go back, come in, bring some documents. They'd be told they didn't have the right documents or something. They'd have to go back and bring them back again. And there's a concern here because there's a deadline for completing recertification. So the longer that it takes for a family to complete, the more likely that they are to miss the deadline. And state data showed that 17% of families did not renew their subsidies each month. And we knew that some number of these families were still eligible because they did have an appeals process, and that showed, parents were filing appeals every month. And saying that they, had missed the deadline for whatever reason and wanted to get back onto the program without going onto the waiting list. And so every month they were handling a certain number of appeals. And so we, again, were aiming to help parents complete recertification in one appointment and increase the number of parents who renewed on time. So I want to just introduce you to the existing process. As Emily said, one of the first steps after you have defined a problem in behavioral diagnosis and design is to look at the process, map the process. So the existing process involved sending parents who were due for recertification a package, a letter in the mail about 45 days before their appointment. And, in this mailing, there would be an appointment letter that would be the first page, and it's a standard form letter that had a line on the top, and that's where the staff person would write in when a person's appointment was. And then the second page is this checklist, and the checklist tells parents what they have to bring in. There are 4 categories, or actually 5 listed here, categories of documents that they have to produce, and then it gives them examples of all the different documents in bullets underneath. And they also got the rules and responsibilities sent to them again. And so parents would get this information, and presumably they would, gather all these documents, come into the office, attend their appointment, and then the CCDF staff person would evaluate their documents for continued eligibility. So we tried to understand why parents were struggling with this, by doing interviews with parents as well as with staff. And what we learned is that the toughest requirement for parents to meet consistently had to do with proving providing proof of their continued service need, particularly that they were employed. And so this requirement, means that parents have to bring in their pay stubs or canceled checks or documentation from a new employer. And the policy states that the employment verification, the proof must be that the parent was employed in the 30 days prior to the appointment, which you can imagine is quite difficult potentially to do because you'd have to line up the timing of your pay stubs with when this appointment is taking place. You also have to have pay stubs that have certain types of information on it. And we know that there's quite a variety of things that people are given to document their income or their employment. And so it might not have the right information on it, especially in the types of jobs that parents in this group have. So, we looked at this process and said, well, this is one of our biggest challenges is this proof of employment. So what could we do to improve this? Now, our starting point for designing behavioral solutions was not to say, well, we should change a letter or we should improve communications. Our starting point was actually to think about how to radically simplify processes at these agencies that we were working with using behavioral insights. And so there were 2 kind of radical solutions, radical ways of simplifying the work verification requirement that presented themselves. First, we could change the wording of the policy in an ideal world, right? So we could really deal with that issue potentially of lining up timing and documentation by changing the wording in the policy around the 30 days of income prior to your appointment. But that would have required going to the state legislature, and that was just not possible within the context of our study. The other solution that presented itself is that we might shift the burden for completing this work verification from parents to employers. So one thing that we know about parents who are part of this process is that if you qualify for the CCDF, you are a person who is working, and yet you do not make enough money to pay for your childcare. So, or you're in school and living on very low income, and you are a parent. Right? So these parents are kind of managing very complicated life situations and maybe experiencing the consequences of scarcity. So, we thought whatever we could do to shift the burden from the individual parent onto, say, an organization like the employer that maybe has more resources, or an individual with more resources or knowledge, that would be a win. And if this solution seems, totally far-fetched and crazy, consider the fact that in the child support program, non-custodial parents, their payments to the child support system are often made by employers and not the non-custodial parents themselves. So we actually looked into this solution. And we found out that in Indiana, there is an e-verification system that many employers use to show how many hours their employees have worked and so on. The problem is that it didn't have the reach within the employer community that we needed, and it wasn't being used at that time for this process. So, this is a solution that we would have liked to have pursued, but it did not seem feasible, again, within the context of our program constraints. So what did we do? Instead, we tested two solutions in two different rounds of tests in Indiana. And the first solution was to try to simplify the list of documents. So going back to that checklist, we said, well, is there a way to communicate the requirements, the recertification requirements, in a way that is more understandable for parents? And then in the second round, we used a different approach where we said, in that mailing that parents receive, can we put more emphasis on the work requirement, the work verification, and try to explain it to parents more? So we'd put a little extra information into our second round mailer to see if that helped parents. So this is an example of the checklist from the first round of the bias test. And as you can see, we have broken down the list of things that parents have to bring into 4 categories. And then we removed some of the clutter on that initial checklist and focused parents in on the most common and easily accessible forms of documentation that they could find. In our second round, this is an example of one of the things that was sent out to parents, or actually 2 of the items. And so we did a more intensive personalization of the documents in the second round. And there, we chose a slogan, which is that we asked parents to simply bring in all pay stubs that they had received, every form of documentation of employment that they had received from a certain day, which was personalized in each parent's mailer, to the day of their appointment, and said, don't try to figure out what you need to bring. It's too complicated. Just bring absolutely everything that you have. And then we also sent them a postcard that, again, reminded them of the date of their appointment and the recertification requirements. And so here are the results from the first round. So we looked at the same 3 outcomes in each of the 2 rounds. And the things that we were interested in was first attending the first scheduled appointment, because again, we want people to start early. So we thought it was important to look at whether or not people attended their first appointment. And we see that in the first round, where we simplified the checklist, we did see an impact of 2.6 percentage points on people showing up for their first scheduled appointment. We also looked at whether or not people renewed their subsidy in one appointment. This is the efficiency outcome. So we wanted to see, could we make the process more efficient for parents and for staff? And here we had a 3.2% percentage point impact on parents completing recertification in one appointment. So the simplified checklist did seem to be helpful. However, we didn't have an impact on renewing subsidies on time. So although, again, the process was more efficient for parents in the treatment group, we did have parents in the control group who maybe through attending multiple appointments were able to essentially catch up to the intervention group and, about the same proportion completed recertification on time. Now let's look at the findings from round 2 of the study. There, we had a different pattern of results, which is actually quite interesting. So we had, instead of about a 2 percentage point impact on attending the first scheduled appointment, in this round we had a 10.6 percentage point impact. So something about perhaps the personalization, the higher level of personalization of those mailings, really communicated to parents the importance of coming into that first scheduled appointment. We didn't, however, see the impact on renewing subsidies in one appointment. So the hope that we had of improving the efficiency of the process was not achieved in this round. However, there was an impact on renewing subsidies on time, a 2.7 percentage point impact. So again, you were seeing here that through the use of revised mailings, revised communication, you can have an impact on very policy relevant outcomes. So I want to just finish off with a few of the lessons that we learned. First and foremost, we saw that the whole process of working with bias and going through the behavioral diagnosis and design process was a way for innovators within government to gain a voice and to justify, in most cases, doing more for customers. That is a very hard argument to make within some of these agency settings. There's still that highly rationalist model that governs the way that we think about, especially staff-client interactions, and that says, we don't necessarily need to do more. We don't need to remind people because we've told them that they need to come in, that they need to do something. It's hugely important, so why wouldn't they pay a lot of attention to this? And yet, the behavioral lens shows us that we often do need to do more. And so this framework, it empowers those innovators within government who want to do more. For the behavioral diagnosis process, we tend to look at data, but in the bias sites, we found that we typically had to rely on qualitative data or incomplete quantitative data because there wasn't a lot of fine-grained information, quantitative information about how clients flowed through programs and some of those proximate outcomes of interest. We also found the behavioral mapping process was time-consuming and revealed discrepancies between levels of government. That should come as no surprise. This is the typical discrepancy between the policy as written and the way it is implemented, or management kind of notions of how things should be done, and the staff person, the frontline staff persons. And so the behavioral mapping process is one of the benefits of behavioral diagnosis and design work in and of itself. It is because we are trying to simplify these processes, we have to resolve these discrepancies, and that is always a benefit to the agencies that we work with. Number 4, we found that simplification is not simple, and I hope that the case study that I gave you gives you an example of that. We also found that in most cases, the randomization procedures could not be automated. So we had a group of staff we had to get together who were stuffing envelopes for people in the intervention group and sending those out and so forth. It was labor intensive. And so, this is a question for us. If we are trying to institutionalize rapid cycle evaluation, randomized controlled trials, how would we do it and make it scalable? And we also found that government agencies are becoming increasingly sophisticated in the use of personalized and digital communication, but some of that infrastructure was still in development when we were doing bias. So I think, we have seen in our subsequent projects a huge advance in the sophistication of these agencies that we work with, in their ability to use digital communication. But at the time of bias, it was pretty early days. And so we only had a few of the sites that use things like text messaging and email, which I think will become more standard in behavioral insights work. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Good morning. One of the great things about behavioral science is when you see the results and the concepts, you think, that is so obvious. How many people thought, clearly? So we provided this plenary to work backwards. We gave you the findings first, then we gave you the operational lessons, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about theory. And the reason is that once you start to see the theory, you totally think you understand, this is human nature, and you totally think you expect to know what was found. But in actuality, we're human, and we make all of the fallacies that Emily talked about earlier. And that basis is the basis underlying the bias project. So there are basically 5 things that you've just heard Emily, Mary, and Nadine share. First, you cannot look at actions to determine intentions. And this is pretty obvious when you think back to the Texas experiment that Mary discussed. It's in everyone's interest to avoid accumulating debt, particularly if you can apply to not make that happen. Yet it doesn't happen in many cases, and you could see that in Texas, and even more so in Washington, where Mary mentioned that there was a 32 percentage point increase in the number of modification applications, despite that being within someone's interest. Seeing that someone hasn't applied does not mean they're uninterested. There could be a number of reasons for that, and we've provided very simple, small interventions that have changed those outcomes dramatically. Another insight that you see is that really small changes, we're talking letters, communications, rewording, as in the TANF example, framing something as a loss versus a gain, very low cost. It doesn't even cost you ink to think about doing these things, yet you can get 3 percentage point impacts in doing something just that small. Nadine mentioned in Indiana, thinking about what is causing a process from not delivering the outcomes that's desired. Look at it from many perspectives. Now, how many of you look at your government forms and think, clearly, that is the best way to portray that information? Okay, so it's May, and you don't remember doing your taxes, right? Happened a long time ago. But any government form you look at, it often takes a while to say, wait a minute. And then there's that OMB disclaimer about the time taken to complete the form, which is always priceless. But think about that perspective and coming in, and now you're under duress because you actually need benefits and you need to provide all of these forms, and the language is not clear, and the onus for you to process that. So thinking about it from multiple perspectives, and you can see how the facets that Nadine identified are really important from a client perspective, but it's also important from a staff perspective to understand that what's being requested may be problematic for a client to produce. And so how could those processes be made simpler? All throughout what we said today is about identifying the problem before divining the solution. And while that may seem obvious, when you think back to how we typically talk about the problem, we often embed a solution. So Nadine and Mary did not say, how can we get clients to bring in their pay stubs in order to get these child care benefits? That wasn't the question. The question was, what is the barriers that are preventing clients from taking these benefits? And once you broaden yourself to not focus on a solution, because a solution means that you will only focus on that one thing, but broadening yourself to think about the problem holistically, now you have many more options to consider. And once you look at the entire process, you can identify the places where the bottlenecks seem to be low-hanging fruit and easily addressed. And solving those things first often means that you can then free up resources to tackle the harder questions that might require more resources or changes to processes. So throughout all of this, I hope you walked away with the 5th sort of motivation behind bias, which is that incentives are often not aligned. Despite the fact that human service programs are there to benefit clients to help with self-sufficiency, there are processes and procedures in place that often make that outcome not tangible. And it's because the incentives put in place and the hassles associated with it makes that cost-benefit calculation different from what we think it should be. So going back to theory, BIAS was focused first and foremost on nudges. It was intended to look at low-cost interventions from the beginning and not to do very intensive interventions. We developed the project in 2010, and if you remember, around that time, 2008, Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein had come out with the book Nudge, which was about these very small changes that had outsized effects. So from the beginning, we were thinking of this project as a proof point. Can you do these things in human service agencies, and they have a result? Across all of the 15 RCTs that we conducted, we essentially used 7 behavioral concepts throughout. And we've come up with a small mnemonic to remember that called Simpler. Now, it's important to know that we did not go into the project thinking we're going to use one of these 7 behavioral concepts. Rather, across all of the projects, looking at the problem, defining the solution, diagnosing, et cetera, we came up with these concepts, and they happen to have been ones that were universally used because many of the interventions and the problems suggested were related. So Simpler, S, stands for social influence. And this is the idea of having persuasion by peers, famous people, things like you should apply for a modification order. Other parents in your situation have done so before and have benefited. Implementation prompts. Nadine and both Mary mentioned this. What exactly are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Precisely what the plan is. Oftentimes you find that it helps you plan out your action to get something done. And that is true for the clients we serve as well. Mandated deadlines. How many of you work better under pressure? No one. There's a little hand. I once saw a graph where this was productivity and this was time, and the graph looked like that. And I thought, that's totally me. Give me the day 2 days before, and I'm on it. Give me a week, and I'm just like, because there are other things that are on that slope. This is human nature as well. And so as we think about serving our clients, embedding deadlines, even artificial deadlines, we didn't get into details here, but one of our studies for Paycheck Plus shows that providing clients with artificial deadlines helps motivate getting the desired behavior completed. Personalization. Both Mary and Nadine gave examples of this. Personalizing the interaction, either pre-populating forms, calling someone by their name, identifying them as the parent of their child, or having some interactive personalization to help a client get through a more difficult piece of the process. Loss aversion, simple reframing of gains versus benefits, where generally humans are more responsive to losing an equivalent amount compared to a gain. All throughout the BIAS project, we've been focused on making things easier. Easier for clients in terms of understanding what is required for them to submit or to work through a process. And this takes many, many forms. We've done a lot of nudges and communications in order to do this, but we've also worked with agencies on studies that were not evaluated to make things simpler. So an example of that is in Vermont, we worked with an agency to simplify transition from the TANF program to a supplemental work program after our clients left TANF. When we came in to work with the agency, an applicant actually had to apply. So once you left TANF, you needed to apply for this supplemental work program. This is an unneeded hassle factor, and we were wondering whether it would be possible to just automatically enroll the client, given that these work supports were supposed to help the self-sufficiency goal and seemed into alignment. This is an easier outcome. What resulted was the agency realized that that was how they should have been operating the program in the beginning. And finally, reminders. So many of you, like myself, need reminders about things that are due. I often have my bills automatically paid because it's just easier to think about. For those places that don't allow that, there then needs to be some mechanism for reminding. My child's lunch cost is an example of that. I only know when he's hungry and in deficit. It would be so much easier if they just said, here, pay this at the beginning of the month. And this is what a reminder can do. In one of our studies, we had non-custodial parents who were not given any notice about their child support being due. They knew they needed to pay it by the end of the month, but there wasn't necessarily an invoice being submitted, nor were the child support dollars being withdrawn automatically. And what we implemented was essentially a reminder, because it's difficult to remember towards the end of the month this thing is due, particularly when you have deadlines for other bills. By the time the end of the month comes, you might have forgotten or you might not have the resources to pay. Our intervention implemented reminders at 2 points, once in the middle of the month, another towards the end of the month, to have the bill paid by the end. And this small intervention actually increased the proportion of parents paying. So as I mentioned, bias was focused on nudges, and what we define as nudges is essentially the first column here. Small interventions that affect clients either directly or at the system level. And these are things that are low cost, easily implementable. And that was by design, intentional. The next phase of the behavioral work that we're embarking upon with HHS tries to move beyond nudges. Now that we've established a proof point and we've seen positive impacts for most of the interventions we've implemented, can we do more with these types of techniques? So one of the first forays into trying to do more in this next phase is working with the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement on the behavioral interventions for child support services. So the idea here is to use behavioral interventions, working with 8 agencies in order to see if we can improve outcomes in child support. So this is joint work with the Federal Department of Child Support Enforcement, as well as with MEF Associates and the Center for Policy Research. So the project is focused on providing not only behavioral interventions, but doing it in such a way that agency staff are empowered to understand the process that Nadine and Mary just described and implemented along with the technical assistance team as well as in the absence. It's also focused on positively engaging parents and simplifying the child support process throughout. The ultimate goal of the project is to both implement behaviorally informed solutions, but also to empower staff to think more holistically about this toolkit to apply and to improve their programs. So as I mentioned, the study is working with 8 different agencies across the nation. And the goal is to move a bit beyond nudges. And so what you see is that even though the study is in progress now, a few of the RCTs are underway, we're moving beyond that nudge-like column to focus on interventions that happen more at the system level, meaning that there's a change in processes that affect large swaths of people as opposed to individual clients only, and interventions that are more in that furthermost column that are more intensive, meaning that they're not necessarily behavioral nudges, but they might entail things that require more one-on-one assistance with clients, or things that result in entire changes in processes, such as a change in eligibility criteria, which is a non-trivial change that affects all of the system, but also can be more intensive. With the Administration for Children and Families, we're also embarking upon BIAS Next Generation. So this is a follow-up program to BIAS that's geared to also move beyond nudges. One of the goals of BIAS Next Generation is to expand the use of behavioral economics beyond the domains that we've studied in BIAS. to track longer-term outcomes. So as Nadine mentioned, most of the outcomes that we examined in bias were very proximal to the thing that was being changed. So for example, we tracked the number of modification applications as opposed to the number of applications that were actually modified in terms of the child support amount being changed. One is a very proximal outcome. You know how many applications were put in. The other is longer term because it has to work its way through the system in order to actually get the child support order changed. So in Bias Next Generation, we're trying to look at both of those things. As Nadine mentioned, many studies in academia, and Mark mentioned this as well, will focus only on the impact. Did it work or did it not? When a lot of this, the learning actually is in the implementation, what it took to implement something, why implementation failed, or what needed to be changed in terms of actual implementation from the original design. So in Bias Next Generation, we're intentionally paying much more attention to this than we were able to in Bias. And finally, in order to help you in the larger field, we're focused much more on developing dissemination materials that are targeting to helping administrators implement these types of techniques on their own. So Bias Next Generation essentially just started. We're in our early phase now. We've identified 2 areas to work in, TANF, as well as child welfare, with 2 other domains to be determined. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to just thank the panel for inviting me to come up and join them this morning and say a few words as we reflect on all the things that we've learned from the BIAS project. And it's been a great pleasure for me to get to be involved with this work from the beginning. There's a lot of lessons that have come out of this work. And the first thing that I want to say is, for those of us that have spent a lot of time studying this field of behavioral science, I think it's important to note to this audience that these are insights that are really about creating behavior change and using what we know about human psychology to change people's behavior. And these are insights that have been leveraged in the private sector for a long time. And so we look at them in the context of marketing and organizational behavior and consumer behavior. And I think when we look at it in the public and nonprofit sector, it can be useful to really frame it as that, as behavior change. And this project has really been so important because it's helped us look at how these tools can be leveraged in the public sector. And there are unique constraints that are there. And my colleagues touched on much of this, but often there are less resources and there are many more constraints on the types of burdens that we can place on our clients or our customers, or however we want to describe them. So I think it's important to recognize that this project has really acknowledged those constraints and learned how to work in the constraints of this area. In addition, this diagnosis and design process is something that I think is really important to recognize as a really crucial step in this process. And I agree that very often we don't talk about this phase of the process. And this isn't a new idea, but I think that the work of BIAS really helped us to conceptualize it and describe it as being a really important methodology that's essential to finding ways to use the insights from behavioral science as a tool. So I think it's something that's important for us to take away as well. And also, as everyone has mentioned, these are often really low-cost interventions, and often we may look at some of the effect sizes and think that they look smaller, but it's important to also recognize that these can add up to create bigger impacts. And so these really small changes can turn into really important, larger effects. And in addition, these are evaluations that can often be much more nimble and rapid, and so they can complement different types of work that often needs to happen over a much longer time frame. And so as we look at other ways of evaluating programs and changing programs, I think we should see this work as being complementary to other types of work in the same fields. In addition, I want to highlight this idea that these, again, are low cost, often consistent effects we can see over different trials, and scalable, which are some things that Mary mentioned right up front. And when we look at the simpler framework, this is a really excellent way for us to get some major takeaways to see what were the insights that tended to come up. And again, recognizing that these projects weren't carried out with these interventions in mind, but these are things that tended to come up. And I think that there's a lot of work we can do to get a better understanding and even a more nuanced description of how those insights in the simpler framework can be applied in different contexts. In addition, this work creates new understanding for how these programs work and how different levels of staff interact with these programs, how they're being implemented on a practical level, and what they look like from the perspective of the client. And one of the biggest contributions that this work makes is that it allows us to really understand what are the behaviors that are being faced by clients on the ground when they're interfacing with these programs. Because very often there's a lot that is changed or lost from the level of the design of a program to the actual implementation and rollout of that program. And importantly, this helps us to think about assumptions that we're making that are often faulty about what people's intentions are, what their constraints are, and how they understand their situation. And again, I think this is something that my colleagues talked about in each of their remarks, is that this approach allows us to reconfigure some assumptions that we may be making about how people are interacting with programs. And in addition, it's really crucial moving forward for us to consider the role that technology plays in how our clients interact with programs. And there are a lot of opportunities for communication to be more effective, for access to become easier, and for us to leverage more behavioral insights, whether it's in the form of reminding people about actions that they need to take or personalizing communication, for example. I think there are many more opportunities for us to do this. Again, just in the few short years since these projects were implemented, I think there are even more and more opportunities for this. So this is something that I hope that we continue to consider as we move forward. And on that note, I want to make a few comments about how we ought to think about leveraging additional tools as we move forward in the next stages of this work. First of all, I think it's difficult to overstress the importance of leveraging and using administrative data at all stages of this work. Administrative data can be crucial at the diagnosis process to help us understand what's happening in these contexts. Often that can be different based on geography or different demographics of the clients that we work with. And I think there are many, many more opportunities to work with administrative data at that stage of the process. It can also help us understand when and how many of these insights are working and how some of these tools are working. And so as we move forward, we should continue to work with our partners to really find the best ways to use administrative data effectively in the context of these experiments. In addition, benefit cost analysis is something that comes up very often in the work that many of us do as a potential tool. And so I think it's something that we should start to look at more closely and think about how we can complement some of these. We heard a little bit about the cost of some of these interventions. I think that there's a lot more that we can do as we start to weigh different components of these interventions and try to really understand what's their cost versus the benefit that we get from them, because they are often low cost, and it's important to understand how those low costs measure up next to some of the effect sizes that we see. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to continue to do this. And I think this will allow us to continue to make a case for why this type of work is important and how potentially it can create bigger changes in the systems that we work within. In addition, we should consider how, in the context of this work, we should be creating more relationships across different agencies and across different organizations. Most of the studies that we talked about today, if not all, were conducted in the context of a single agency or organization. And as we think about trying to make these programs work better for the families, it's crucial to acknowledge that many of the families that we work with, and this is no surprise to any of us, they're interacting with many different agencies and organizations. And so how can we leverage the insights from behavioral science to help these families get more and work more effectively and efficiently with the programs and the agencies that they're engaging with? And I think when we start to do that and we start to think about opportunities around potentially integrating benefits and streamlining access to multiple programs, we can also find that it can make those programs operate more efficiently and effectively as well. And in the course of all of this, we can think about building capacity in the agencies and the organizations that we work with and sharing lessons learned across agencies and organizations as well. As we move forward, it's also important for us to think about how we can potentially move beyond these client-centered interventions. And so most of the interventions that we've talked about today have been at the level of the individual client. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to consider engaging in many of these processes at the level of program staff. For example, I think there are other ways to conceptualize this, but when we think about program staff, we could imagine a completely different process of diagnosis and design, a distinct set of touch points that could potentially create wider impact. And so if we can consider interventions that are targeted for staff, they could potentially be easier to implement and track, and they might even have opportunities to create larger effects. And so I hope that as we move forward with BICS and with Bias Next Generation, I think we're already starting to consider some of these, but they're really important because as we try to think about going beyond these simple nudges at the level of individual clients, this is one way to try to get to a larger scale use of a lot of these insights. And just a couple final points I'd like to make. First of all, I want to just stress that I believe, are only scratching the surface of how we can use these insights in the context of serving the families that we all work with. And I think we need to continue to learn from the implementation of these trials. And this is something, again, that my colleagues stress that I think is really crucial, is that often we look at the problem, we look at the intervention and the effects, but that process of implementation, I think everyone up here can tell you, we learn so much from the process of these implementations. And so I think we need to continue to learn and share the lessons that we get in the process of those implementations. And then finally, and this goes back to some of the comments that were made by Mark at the beginning, I think it's important to think about the extent to which we're being incredibly transparent with the processes and the trials and the results that we're getting. And so I think it's important to report on and to disseminate all results, even those that are not significant, because over the course of time, as we look at the many different experiments and the insights that we try to leverage, it's important for us to learn when and how these work in different contexts. And so being transparent with this work is really crucial, and pulling all of this together, it will help us, again, to build capacity in the partners that we work with to better serve the families that we're trying to improve the lives of. So thank you.
Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. There are microphones across the room, so if you're here, you can come to one of the microphones. And if you're not here, you can email a question, or you can tweet using Rex Live, and we'll answer your questions. Yes, you do.
This might be a naive question, but I'm wondering if you witnessed any change in the frontline staff behavior when you implemented these programs. For example, you were doing mailers or reminders to try to change customer behavior. For example, resolution in the first appointment. But just the fact you're running a program in an agency and everyone knows that you're running a program. They're like, oh, we're doing a program, and they're going to do these mailers and these reminders. Did their behavior change where they became more mindful of perhaps that first appointment resolution? And did that, in turn, change the results or improve the results? Or were program staff unaware of these interventions that were going on? And if you did recognize that, was there a way to control for that so you could find out what was program staff or frontline staff behavior influencing the outcomes versus what were the mailers or the reminders that were influencing the outcomes? Does that make sense?
That's a great question. Yes, totally understood. So in the study that I described, the recertification study, the frontline staff who actually reviewed the materials were not involved in the design of this intervention. The managers within the intake agencies were, as well as the people who managed them. And so that was, again, a decision that was made because of sort of resource constraints and the desire for the managers to see some proof of concept before getting their frontline staff really deeply involved in this work. And so this frontline staff, they didn't change their behavior in that particular study. In another context in Indiana, we did a study where we were trying to encourage CCDF parents to choose quality-rated childcare when they received a subsidy. And there were two intervention arms. So there was an arm where families just received personalized referrals in the mail when they got onto the CCDF wait list. And then another where they got the personalized referrals plus a proactive phone call from somebody who worked in the Child Care Resource and Referral Agency. So in that case, consumer education staff knew that they were part of the study and they were delivering a conversation. They were, this conversation was designed using behavioral principles. And in that case, you did have more of an intensive kind of training or capacity building at the frontline staff level, which informed their work, at least for the study, and we understand it did influence their work going forward.
Hi, Charlie Homer from ASPE. This work, very exciting. Congratulations on the work. In a sense, it seems to be a form of quality improvement, focusing on the behavioral psychology aspects of change, which is terrific. One of the other attributes of quality improvement is graphing data over time and continuously tweaking and modifying your intervention to see if you can continuously improve the results. And I just wondered whether you have a mechanism of building that kind of continuous improvement into your interventions rather than or in addition to the before and after impact evaluations that were shown in the presentation.
Well, I guess, so we did do some tests that were essentially rapid cycle evaluations where we implemented an intervention, looked at the results after, say, 3 months or so of study intake, and then modified the intervention based on those results and did another test. I feel like in many of these agencies that we worked with, we could still be working with them today. I mean, there was the appetite, the appetite for doing these changes grows over time. Their willingness to try more intensive changes grows over time. It's simply an issue of resources, because in the context of bias, we were doing the consultant model in a way where our expertise was enabling the agencies to design these interventions, put them into the field, and do the randomized controlled trial evaluation of them. Without that support, I think it would be hard to sustain the kind of work that was done. And of course, the project came to an end. So, to our knowledge, we don't know that the agencies have continued with this kind of iterative quality improvement testing.
But completely agree. But one thing to note that in the newer projects, the BICS, Behavioral Interventions for Child Support Services, the model there is technical assistance in the beginning with the understanding of translation of knowledge of process so that the agency staff can carry on and implement other interventions on their own. So that's more likely to result in these plan, do, study, act cycles and continuous improvement than what we were able to do in bias.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Carolyn Heinrich, Vanderbilt University. On your slide previewing the next generation of bias, you mentioned moving from nudges to changes in choice architecture. I was wondering if you could say more at this time about what choice architecture are you thinking with, for example, working with agencies and the choices they offer, or working with the individuals who are seeking services and how they frame their choices? So what, is it a combination? Just interested in hearing a little bit more about that plan.
So we're in the very early stages of Bias Next Generation. The project officially launched in September. So where we are is doing a consultation with stakeholders, understanding the general problems in the areas of child welfare in TANF. And what we're seeking to do is identify problems that have wide applicability so that they're not so contextual that what we find in one place has very little meaning for an agency in another state. So in that sense, we can't say exactly what the solution is because really we're starting from the mechanism of defining the problem, and the problem is going to then determine what the solutions are. The distinction is that we have more resources to work with agencies and more time in order to delve deeper and move beyond simple communications, but we're also not ruling out simple communications as being part of an intervention. So not a completely satisfactory answer, but our goal is to move more towards things that may take a little bit more time to implement at an agency.
Don Beltrame with the National Child Care Center on Subsidy, Innovation, and Accountability. By the way, Debbie Ream asked me to say hello to all you guys. She's with us now. When you were talking about the Indiana study, there was one point that you mentioned that you were looking at shifting the burden to the employer in terms of employment verification. There's a lot of parochial things that go on in that. I mean, consecutive wage stubs over 6 weeks periods, when you can use year-to-date, thing like that. But what we found, or what I found in my experience, that sometimes reaching out and involving an employer in this particular case can have a very negative impact on the relationship between the family, the parent, the working parent, and the employer. So I just wondered if you would comment a little bit about some of the parameters or concerns that you weigh when you're actually looking at taking that type of an action.
So, I mean, we didn't get far enough in the conversation in Indiana to really get to the question that you're raising about how it would impact parents if we were to do this. What we were trying to find is a system that almost was operating in the background that would provide us with information that was needed for these recertifications and could be accessed in real time by the staff. And so when the e-verification system in place in Indiana actually would serve that purpose, but it is not currently being used in that way. And there's a political question as well about whether or not it is desirable for employers to take on more of a burden related to helping parents complete their recertifications. Now, the point that you're raising is incredibly important, and we encounter it in the child support area as well, where it is completely normative right now to assume that a non-custodial parent who is employed will have automatic deductions from their wages to pay their child support. And that just means that, in a sense, we're shifting the burden for paying child support from an individual parent to the Human Resources Department or Finance Department at an employer. And there are consequences for non-custodial parents. We have heard in our BICS project about non-custodial parents who despise that process and think it has stigmatized them in the eyes of their employer. Nevertheless, that is a system which has made a choice that the benefits of those essentially automated remittances to state registries outweighs the cost in terms of certain people's relationships with their employers. And again, to the extent that we can make this the norm so that all employers are expected to do it and explain to employers why, like how this benefits families and children, then there may be a way to overcome some of those issues.
Hi, my name's Sophie Shilo. I'm from Us Together. In Ohio, it's a refugee resettlement agency. So on top of constraints that a lot of low-income families normally have, my clients also face language barriers, cultural barriers, a lot of really, honestly, patriarchal barriers that bar a lot of our women from participating in programs to the fullest extent. So do you have any experience with that, or any of your studies including foreign populations, specifically immigrants or non-English speaking individuals? And if so, what have you found in terms of reminders and nudges that work for those foreign populations? Thank you.
Do I have to turn mine off? Sorry.
In some of our experiments, we did translate the materials, but we didn't really focus on non-English speakers. Just to give a little shout out to another project we're starting with ACF on TANF and RCA and the interaction between refugee cash assistance and TANF. We're going to be looking at some of those. We're going to be doing a lot of site visits this summer, so we will be. I mean, actually, every project now that I work on with ACF or DOL, I'm always bringing my behavioral economics insights into these programs, so we're definitely going to be looking at that.
Yep, in the middle.
Hi,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Oh, and then.
I'm Cassandra Furman with the Friends National Center for Child Abuse Prevention. And my question is on the development of your interventions. Did you use parent focus groups? Did the actual clients who receive service participate in development of interventions? And I was also interested in if the parents' work schedules impacting their ability to keep appointments. Did they have a say as to when their appointments were scheduled?
All right. Yes. So in the diagnosis phase of each of these projects, we do have conversations with the program's users. And I mean, we were limited within the context of the BIAS project because of lack of large-scale like OMB clearance so we couldn't do surveys of these groups. But we did do some focus groups and have some informal conversations with customers about their experience. Once we had implemented the tests in the sites that I worked on where we iterated, we did another round of testing after the first round. We actually went out into the field when our intervention had completed and got feedback from parents who had not responded to the revised communications, as well as those who had, to better understand, what is still challenging about this process and how can we further improve it. I think that is what you're pointing at is the next generation. It is the future of behavioral insights work, is to partner more closely with the users in the design and development of the interventions. In BICS, for example, we have included another touch point with customers once we have completed the initial design of the intervention. So we talk to customers when we're trying to figure out what the barriers are. Then when we have designed something, we talk to customers again and essentially go through a prototyping stage with them to try to see, do they understand these revised communications better? Are we choosing the right channels to try to reach them? And then again, we will be back in the field again at the implementation stage to understand, if our interventions have worked once they're deployed. I think you had another question, but I wanted to know about scheduling appointments. Many of the families we work with, their employers are not going to give them time off. Right. It's a huge, huge issue. So I will say that in Indiana, in those recertification studies, we had originally hoped to do a third round of tests. It is, again, this sort of proof of concept thing, because I think for the staff, they want to start with the smallest changes. They want to know if we can make minor changes to the program that will get us acceptable results before going to something that is a more radical solution. So, they saw the results of those first 2 rounds of recertification tests, and the anticipated third round would have involved allowing some parents to complete their recertification through a drop-off process or by mailing in their documentation. I have sat in the lobby at CCDF offices where recertification is taking place. The burden of going into those offices to complete this process is incredibly intense on parents. And we had parents who were saying, I'm sitting here, but my lunch hour ends in 10 minutes. So I may have to leave, go back to work, and then come back another day to try to do this. Or people who have to arrange childcare after work to get back to the office to complete it. Huge burden. So that is absolutely an important thing for us to think about in redesigning processes.
So we have 5 more minutes. I see 2 questions over here.
I'm just wondering what, if anything, you did to make sure that the program staff implemented the interventions consistently so that you can, get the results you're looking for.
I'm trying to invite my panelists to get involved.
So it varied by intervention. So as Mary was saying, some of the sites had mailings. So we're sending out postcards, we're sending out letters, and the implementation there is to make sure that they've gone out in accordance to the schedule, for which we verified that. Many of the things that we've done were smaller type interventions, but the things that involve some personalization did have some training. But we didn't do the level of implementation research that we're envisioning for the next stage projects.
And I will say on the BICS projects, we are doing that, the child support behavioral economics projects, we are doing a lot more monitoring. We have a monitoring site visit where we monitor to make sure that the intervention is being applied as we hope it should be, and really tracking that and making tweaks along. If we don't think that they're doing what we train them to do, then we're asking them to, improve upon it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jody Sanford from the University of Minnesota's Public Policy School. So thanks for the great panel. I think this is a really promising area of research, and I'm pleased it's being done in our fields. I'm wondering if you can be a bit more explicit about why you selected the particular program areas that you did in the first phase. Because I'm thinking about the woman who asked the question about refugees, or thinking about some work we're doing in Minnesota in SNAP ENT. If I'm sitting here listening to this presentation, I know you've just begun the empirical work, the initial findings seem promising. So if I'm working in an area that isn't specifically the area you've chosen, what kind of guidance would you give to me about how to do a bias-like or a behaviorally informed tweak, perhaps to a program that I implement that could be consistent with kind of the direction that you're kind of leading us in? Like, what are some of the principles, and why did you select what you did? And are there areas in the programs here for which this kind of approach really shouldn't be tried?
But I need a microphone. So in terms of how we selected the original program areas and programs, it was actually quite organic. So we didn't talk a lot about this, but at the beginning of BIAS, this was a brand new field for us, for human services, for ACF. And we spent a lot of time just talking to people, explaining the principles of behavioral science, trying to understand what challenges were they facing in their programs, and did these challenges seem amenable to behavioral science interventions. And we had a very enthusiastic response. We had a particularly enthusiastic response from the child support community, and you saw that was reflected, that those were 8 of the 15 tests. We didn't really go in thinking we were going to test particular program areas. We kind of let sites and projects bubble up organically through those conversations. It is a goal of the Next Generation Project to move beyond those child care, work support, child support program areas. And so, as LaShawn said, we've identified TANF and child welfare, but we have 2 other domains that are TBD. So certainly we're open to ideas for where these interventions would be fruitful. And then in terms of, a program area that isn't the focus of BIAS, that was one of our goals of developing a simpler framework, and a goal of BIAS Next Gen to develop materials that sites who aren't going to be in BIAS, aren't going to have access to a lot of technical assistance or an evaluator, can take some of these simple tools and have a starting place.
So just to add to that, we have a number of things that are available for people who are interested in understanding in more detail how we implemented the behavioral diagnosis and design process. We have a concept paper that's on ACF's website as well as MDRC's that outlines the general process that we use to engage in the project. We also will have a final report coming out by December this year that will give in more detail items around Simpler and how that was implemented in each of the site. There are a number of frameworks that are already out in existence that will provide guidance as to how to apply behavioral insights by other organizations. So if you, for example, Google EAST by the BIT team, you'll find a framework. If They also produced Mindspace, another framework. So there are a number of things out there that will allow you to get started in a way. In November of this year, we're also hosting a webinar that's geared towards practitioners to understand the implementation of behavioral insights that will provide, as will these other documents I'm mentioning, some guidelines for problems that seem to be the right size and right fit for a behavioral intervention. Many of the things that we examined in bias, we were looking for large sample sizes, for example, or that affected large people because we were expecting these nudges to have very modest effects. We didn't mention this, but in the literature, nudges range in impact between 3 and 5 percentage points. They're not huge changes. So these are not necessarily things that are going to completely alleviate poverty in and of themselves. You might find phenomenal changes like we did in Washington, but that's not the norm. So you're generally looking at processes that entail large sample sizes, that might entail low resources if you don't have program dollars. And as Nadine mentioned, there are a number of operational considerations as well. So all of these things, these tidbits will be in our final report, and there's some information out there already on our website.
Okay, so I think we've come to the end of our time, so let's thank our panel again.